Hey everyone. Today we climb into a helicopter where the door is not safety but exposure, and life dangles from a single strap of canvas. The jungle below is alive with fire bullets snapping from tree lines, rockets streaking toward thin-skinned machines, and gunners who lean halfway into the void just to keep their brothers alive. You won't hear about grand strategies or polished generals here, only the roar of rotors drowning out screams. The stench of fuel and blood mixing on the cabin floor, and the laughter of men who joke about death because it's the only way not to lose their minds. This isn't about maps or shifting front lines. It's about hot landing zones where survival was measured in seconds, monkey straps that held back the abyss, and the strange brotherhood forged by those who lived suspended between sky and jungle. If you want raw stories of courage, recklessness, and the terrifying reality of war from above, hit like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from? And would you dare to lean out of that door now? Strap in tight and join me on the ride into the terrifying world of Vietnam's door gunners. As the Huey thrums beneath you, a living, breathing metal beast, you feel the vastness of the jungle spread out, an endless green carpet woven with shadows and secrets. Your left arm, your legs, nearly half your body, dangles outside the aircraft's open maw. There's only the thin, nylon monkey strap cinched around your waist, a slender tether connecting you to life, to the whirring machine. You become acutely aware of its subtle tension, a constant, gentle pressure that is both comforting and terrifying in its simplicity. It is the only thing truly holding you, keeping you from a sudden, dizzying plunge into the dense foliage below, a fall into the unforgiving embrace of the canopy. You breathe deeply, feeling the warm, humid air rush past your face, tangling in your hair. It carries with it the distinct scent of jet fuel, a hint of ozone, and the ever-present earthy perfume of the jungle itself, wet leaves, decaying wood, the distant, unseen bloom of exotic flowers. Your uniform, damp with sweat, clings to your skin, a second layer of awareness that reminds you of the oppressive heat. Even at this altitude, there are no armor plates here, no thick steel shield to offer solace or protection. Only the thin fabric of your uniform, your flesh and bone against the potential impact of high-caliber rounds, the chilling whisper of a .51 caliber bullet, the heavier, more destructive thud of a 23mm shell. It is an imbalance of vulnerability, a stark, visceral understanding that your very presence is a gamble. The other soldiers, those strapped more securely within the Huey's belly, sometimes offer a grim, knowing smile, a shared understanding of your unique predicament. They call it the VIP seat of death, a macabre jest born of shared hardship. And as you gaze out, the irony is not lost on you. On one side, the world unfolds in a blur of emerald green, an infinite expanse of jungle that seems to swallow light and sound. On the other, there is a straight, dizzying drop, a sensation of falling into an endless abyss, a descent into what can only be described as a hellish void. You are, in this moment, a lord of the sky, commanding a terrifying power from your perch, the mighty M60 cradled in your hands, ready to unleash a torrent of fire. Yet, simultaneously, you are a flying bullseye, an exposed target, vulnerable to every unseen threat. The paradox settles in your chest like a heavy stone. There's a curious entry from a diary, scribbled in the quiet moments between missions. I laughed at the wind, feeling its playful tug against my face. Yet my heart shook like bamboo in a typhoon. This encapsulates the experience perfectly. A mixture of exhilaration and an inescapable, internal trembling. A testament to the raw exposure that defines your role, making every flight an exercise in suspended terror. The slow, rhythmic thud of the rotor blades overhead becomes the heartbeat of this existence, a constant reminder of both life and the ever-present shadow of its abrupt end. In the early days of this swirling aerial dance, before the skies truly became a battlefield of rotors and bullets, the Huey crews were simpler, less burdened by the weight of their own vulnerability. You remember the stories, passed down like ancient parables in hushed tones between flights. Back then, a crew typically consisted of just the pilot, co-pilot, and the ever-resourceful crew chief. They were the pioneers, charting the unknown, navigating the intricate dance between machine and jungle without the heavy burden of additional firepower. The Huey, a marvel of modern engineering, was seen primarily as a transport, a swift messenger across an unforgiving landscape. But the jungle, as you quickly learned, had its own brutal lessons to teach. Helicopters, initially thought to be invulnerable, began to drop from the sky with a chilling regularity, like autumn leaves caught in a violent gale. Each crash, each vanished aircraft, sent a ripple of unease through the ranks. It became clear, with a sobering clarity, that these flying machines, however agile, were desperately in need of more side firepower, a means to defend themselves against the unseen threats that lurked within the dense canopy. The enemy, agile and determined, quickly adapted to the aerial advantage, learning to hide, to ambush, and to bring down these winged predators with surprising efficacy. And so, a new role was born, emerging from the crucible of necessity and survival. They called the first iteration the shotgun rider. This was not a formal position, but rather an urgent, improvised solution. You imagine them, these early pioneers, sitting precariously, half outside the fuselage, an M14 or M16 clutched in their hands, straining to spot the elusive enemy, their bodies exposed to the wind and the looming threat. It was a crude beginning, a desperate measure, born of the immediate need for defensive fire. The sheer act of flying like this, exposed and vulnerable, was a testament to the urgency of their situation. The irony, a cruel twist of fate, was that in those frantic early months, more men were lost to the sheer mechanics of falling out of the aircraft than to enemy bullets. The wind, unseen and unrelenting, became an adversary in itself, tugging and pulling, threatening to snatch a man from his perch and cast him into the green maw below. You can almost feel the chilling rush of air, the sudden lurch, the heart-stopping moment of losing balance. Some, incredibly, were saved by the improvised straps, their bodies swinging wildly in the open air, a terrifying pendulum of life and death. Others, less fortunate, simply vanished, swallowed by the jungle without a trace, their stories ending in an abrupt, silent plummet. The Army, in its clinical language, called it a position, a task to be performed. But to the men who occupied that precarious space, the men who truly understood the brutal reality of their exposure, it was often whispered, with a grim, knowing smile, as paid suicide. The slow, deliberate beat of the rotor blades above becomes a somber cadence to these origin stories, a reminder of the raw, unrefined beginnings of your own terrifying duty. The first flight. The very first time you clutched the heavy machine gun. The thrum of the Huey vibrating through your bones is etched into your memory with the clarity of a dream. You recall the trembling in your hands, an involuntary shaking that seemed to defy your will, a primal response to the sheer, overwhelming reality of your situation. You weren't alone in this. Rookies, new to the searing heat and the chaotic symphony of war, often trembled so violently that, in their desperate attempts to load their weapons, they dropped entire ammo belts, the metallic links scattering across the vibrating floor of the helicopter like a spilled handful of deadly coins. The clatter of brass against metal, the urgent scramble to retrieve them, became a silent testament to the raw, unadulterated fear that gripped even the most resolute among you. Firing the M60 from the open door of a Huey was an experience unlike anything you could have imagined on the ground. It felt, to some, like trying to accurately shoot from a roller coaster jeep, hurtling at impossible speeds, banking and swaying with wild abandon. The wind tore at your uniform, distorting your aim, pushing against the heavy weapon with an invisible force. The target, when it appeared, was often a fleeting glimpse in the blur of green, a shadow amidst the leaves, demanding an impossible precision from an unstable platform. You learned quickly that the rules of engagement on solid ground simply did not apply here. In this swirling, vibrating world of air and noise, there's a strange, unsettling truth about the firefights in the air. You almost never hear the enemy's shots. The deafening roar of the rotor blades, the cacophony of your own M60 creates an acoustic bubble, a protective shroud that muffles the sound of incoming fire. Instead, your first chilling indication that you are under attack comes not from sound, but from sight. Suddenly, inexplicably, holes begin to appear around you, small, neat punctures in the aluminum skin of the Huey, shattered fragments of glass in the cockpit, sudden tears in the fabric of the seats. Each new perforation is a silent, terrifying testament to the unseen enemy, a direct and undeniable proof of their proximity. In those initial moments of terror, some recruits, overwhelmed by the sheer, brutal reality of combat, would squeeze the trigger with their eyes squeezed shut, a desperate, reflexive act born of sheer panic. Their bodies would tense, their breath catching in their throats, as they sprayed bullets blindly into the green, hoping only to repel the unseen menace. The torrent of fire, however undirected, offered a momentary illusion of control, a brief respite from the gnawing fear. And for a few, the ordeal of that first fight proved too much to bear. They broke down, their composure shattering under the intense pressure, unable to reconcile the abstract concept of war with its brutal, visceral reality. These men were quickly washed out, removed from their positions, their tour of duty ending before it had truly begun. The others, the ones who endured, who pushed through the terror, found a strange solace in the shared experience. There was a dark humor, a grim inside joke that permeated the tight-knit crews survive your first day. And you were immediately promoted, not through rank, but through a shared understanding, to professional maniac. It was a title worn with a mixture of pride and weary acceptance, a badge of survival in a role that offered so little. The calm, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, which once felt like a countdown to doom, now begins to settle into a familiar, almost comforting drone, a constant companion in this harrowing initiation. The open doorway of the Huey, a frame around a world of chaos, became your window to an array of missions, each carrying its own flavor of peril and purpose. You learned to distinguish the subtle nuances, the unspoken demands of each task, as the slow, steady beat of the rotors carried you across the vast, undulating landscape. Perhaps the most visceral, the most emotionally charged, were the medevac runs. These were not flights of calculated strategy, but desperate dashes into the very heart of darkness, into kill zones where the fight raged fiercest. You flew directly into the thick of it, the only objective being to pull out the wounded, the broken, the dying. Your M60 would blaze, a defensive shield against the invisible snipers and machine gunners, while below, frantic hands dragged bloodied forms onto the helicopter's floor. The sense of urgency was a palpable thing. A knot in your stomach, a frantic beating in your chest. You understood, with a clarity that stung, that every second counted, that your bullets were the thin line between life and death for those desperate souls below. Then there were the supply drops, a seemingly mundane task that often devolved into moments of absurdity. You'd hover, the rotor wash kicking up dust and debris, as boxes of vital supplies were kicked out onto waiting troops. But sometimes, as you watched, you'd see a frantic wave from below, a gesture of frustration. Then, with a mixture of disbelief and exasperation, you'd watch as those same troops tossed the boxes back into the swirling wind. A furious shout, audible even over the rotors, "Wrong damn boxes." It was a small, almost comical frustration amidst the larger, ever-present threat of combat. A stark reminder of the logistical challenges in a chaotic war. Infantry support missions were a different beast entirely. Here, your role transformed from defender to aggressor, a sweeping hand of fire from above. Your orders were often vague, simply spray bamboo and pray something bleeds. You'd lean out, the wind buffeting your face, and unleash a torrent of lead into the dense tree lines, hoping that amidst the rustling leaves and splintering wood, you might silence an enemy position, or at least suppress their fire, giving the ground troops a crucial moment of respite. It was a blind fury, a desperate attempt to gain an advantage in a fight where the enemy was often unseen. A ghost within the green. The sky itself, during these missions, often transformed into a marketplace of chaos. The constant roar of the rotors mingled with the staccato bursts of gunfire, yours, the enemy's, the distant thud of artillery. Over the intercom, a frantic chorus of screaming voices would chatter, relaying urgent commands, panicked warnings, and clipped reports. To make sense of this auditory maelstrom, a clock system was universally adopted, a simple, elegant solution to impossible communication. "Enemy at 3 o'clock," a pilot would yell, and you knew instantly to swing your weapon to your right, your eyes scanning the horizon. Yet, even this system, designed for clarity, led to absurd moments, misheard commands, or perhaps just the sheer, overwhelming stress. Sometimes resulted in unintended targets. You heard tales, or witnessed firsthand, the momentary confusion that led to blasting an innocent mango tree, or a cluster of banana plants, a fleeting moment of misplaced aggression in a world already overflowing with it. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the Huey's blades, always present, now seems to beat in time with the frenetic energy of the battlefield. A constant underscore to the airborne ballet of death and survival. In your precarious perch, half suspended between the open sky and the dense jungle, your most faithful companion, indeed, your most vital partner, was the M60 machine gun. It felt like an extension of your own arm, a heavy, yet surprisingly balanced instrument of destruction. You knew its weight intimately, around 22 pounds, a substantial piece of metal, yet one that you could maneuver with practiced ease. Despite the buffeting winds and the helicopter's constant sway, its rate of fire was staggering between 500 and 650 rounds per minute. A constant, deafening roar when unleashed. A sound that became synonymous with both defense and offense. The ammunition belts, long and heavy, were draped around your neck and shoulders, like grim necklaces of doom. Each round, cold and metallic against your skin, was a promise of fire, a testament to the raw power you wielded. You learned to manage their weight, to guide them smoothly into the weapon, ensuring a continuous flow of destruction. These belts were not merely supplies, they were your lifeblood, your voice in the chaotic symphony of war. Occasionally, you would encounter the beast known as the minigun. This was a different order of power entirely, a weapon that commanded respect and instilled terror. Its 6 barrels, rotating with hypnotic speed, could unleash an astonishing 6,000 rounds per minute. When it fired, the sound was not a roar, but a terrifying, sustained buzzsaw, a relentless tearing of metal that seemed to shred the very air itself. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming, capable of turning an entire tree line into splinters in mere seconds. It was a weapon of absolute devastation, a force of nature that transformed the air into a storm of lead. As night descended, painting the jungle in shades of inky black, the sky became a canvas for deadly fireworks. Every 5th round in your belt was a tracer, a glowing projectile that arced through the darkness, leaving a luminous trail in its wake. These bright streaks of light, orange or green, were mesmerizing and terrifying in equal measure. They illuminated your path, guided your aim, and simultaneously announced your presence to anyone watching below. They were beautiful in their destructive purpose, painting ephemeral patterns of death against the velvet blackness, a stark contrast to the calm, distant stars. While the M60 and the minigun were your primary tools of trade, you also carried backup, smaller weapons that served a different purpose. Your M14 or M16 rifle, slung within reach, were often jokingly referred to as ego weapons. These were for the unthinkable scenario, for the moment you might hit the ground, when the Huey could no longer protect you, when you became just another soldier slogging through the jungle. They were a last resort, a small comfort in the face of overwhelming odds. There was a prevalent piece of dark humor among the crews, a saying that underscored the intimate relationship you forged with your weapon. The gun was my most faithful lover. She just ate ammo, not food. This phrase, spoken with a weary smile, captured the peculiar bond, the complete reliance you had on this cold, hard piece of steel. The slow, steady thrum of the rotors becomes the pulse of this metallic relationship, a constant, reassuring rhythm beneath the weight of your deadly companions. Within the world of Huey operations, you quickly learned that not all flights were created equal. The type of mission, the configuration of the aircraft, fundamentally changed your role, your purpose, and ultimately, your chances of survival. There were essentially 2 distinct breeds of Huey that defined your existence in the sky: the slicks and the gunships. Each offered a different kind of destiny, a separate path in the aerial ballet of war. The slicks, as they were affectionately known, were the workhorses, the flying buses of the jungle. Their primary mission was transport ferrying troops, supplies, and sometimes the wounded. When you rode on a slick, your role as a door gunner shifted to defense, a vigilant guardian of precious cargo. You were primarily there to protect, to create a cone of suppressing fire that would allow the troops to embark or disembark safely, to keep the enemy's heads down long enough for the helicopter to accomplish its task. Your M60 was a shield, a deterrent against unseen threats. Rather than a tool of aggressive engagement, in this context, you were often seen, with grim resignation, as a human shield. Your exposed body the first line of defense, absorbing the brunt of the incoming fire. Your vulnerability a sacrifice for the safety of those within the cabin. Then there were the gunships. These were the flying tanks, beasts bristling with an intimidating array of weaponry, outfitted with rockets, multiple miniguns, and often grenade launchers. These Hueys were designed for pure, unadulterated aggression. When you were assigned to a gunship, your mission was clear: unleash maximum destruction. You became an airborne executioner, a harbinger of fury, tasked with laying down overwhelming fire to soften enemy positions, provide cover for ground assaults, or directly engage targets. The feeling was different, less about defense, more about projecting raw, unyielding power onto the landscape below. You were a critical component in a symphony of destruction, your weapon a furious extension of the helicopter's devastating capability. The placement on either a slick or a gunship dictated your experience, etching a clear line between the meat shield and the angel of death. On a slick, you felt the profound responsibility of protecting life, a quiet heroism in your exposed position. On a gunship, you embraced the destructive power, the stark reality of your role as an instrument of war. The camaraderie among the crews, often expressed in dark humor, offered a stark choice. Fly slicks if you want to live, gunships if you want to be remembered. It was a saying that encapsulated the inherent danger of both, but also the different ways men sought meaning, or perhaps simply coped, within the madness of it all. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the rotor blades, a constant companion, now seemed to beat with a subtly different intensity, reflecting the unique purpose of each flight, each journey into the heart of the jungle. The very idea of accuracy, as understood on a static firing range, dissolved into a distant fantasy the moment your feet left the ground. From your open doorway, the Huey became a carnival ride, shaking and swaying, pitching and rolling with every gust of wind, every evasive maneuver. You gripped the M60 its weight, a familiar anchor in the tumultuous air. But you knew that true precision was an illusion. The helicopter didn't just move, it vibrated with a furious energy, a living entity that defied stillness. The theory, taught in the calm, measured tones of training, suggested careful, controlled bursts of 5 to 7 rounds. This was the ideal, the tactical approach for conserving ammunition and achieving methodical suppression. But reality, as it always did in this unforgiving landscape, had its own, far more brutal lesson to impart. When the enemy's fire began to rip through the air around you, when the holes appeared like sudden, malignant stars on the fuselage, theory evaporated. Instinct took over. The reality was simple, visceral. Hold the trigger until the belt runs dry. It was a desperate, unthinking spray of lead, a deafening torrent of fire aimed at the perceived threat, a primal scream of self-preservation. You learned the lead target technique, a skill born of necessity and swift calculation. You couldn't shoot where the enemy was. By the time your bullets reached their destination, the helicopter's movement, and often the enemy's, would have rendered that point empty. Instead, you had to anticipate, to shoot where the enemy would be. A fleeting moment of prescience in the chaos. It was an art form of estimation, a complex three-dimensional chess game played at terrifying speed. You would trace the invisible arc, the path of the enemy, and send your bullets ahead, hoping that fate and your quick reflexes would align. From the tree lines below, often as you approached or departed a landing zone, the enemy would open up, spraying their AK-47s in frantic bursts. A deadly rain of bullets against your vulnerable aircraft. Your reply was immediate, instinctual saturation fire. You wouldn't aim for individual targets. You would simply hose down entire sections of the jungle, unleashing a devastating curtain of lead that hopefully suppressed their fire, forced their heads down, or at the very least, made them reconsider their position. It was a brutal, overwhelming response, a display of raw power designed to deter. Often, you found yourself firing not necessarily to score hits, but simply to keep morale up, both your own and that of your crew. The act of returning fire, the reassuring roar of your M60 was a powerful psychological weapon. It gave a sense of agency, a feeling that you were doing something, anything, against the unseen danger. It was a tangible expression of defiance. A veteran once confided, with a weary sigh, "I don't know if I hit anyone, just know the jungle lost a lot of leaves." This sentiment perfectly captured the frustrating, often ambiguous nature of your success. You rarely saw the results, rarely had the satisfaction of a confirmed hit. All you knew was that you had fought back, that you had carved out a temporary space of dominance in an environment that constantly threatened to overwhelm you. The slow, rhythmic beat of the rotor blades becomes a soothing pulse, a constant, gentle backdrop to the violent, unpredictable dance of aerial combat, a testament to the endurance of those who flew. Despite the overwhelming firepower you commanded, the stark reality of your own vulnerability was a constant, gnawing presence. The Huey, for all its revolutionary design and combat effectiveness, was, at its core, little more than a flying tin can. Its aluminum skin, designed for lightness and speed, offered minimal protection against anything beyond small arms fire. And even that was often a gamble. You could feel the thinness of the metal beneath your hand, a chilling reminder of how little stood between you and the brutal reality of the battlefield. You wore a flak jacket, a heavy, cumbersome garment that chafed against your skin, made even more unbearable by the oppressive tropical heat. It was designed, in theory, to stop shrapnel, the jagged fragments of exploding ordnance that could rip through flesh with devastating effect. But you knew, with a certainty born of grim experience, that it offered precious little defense against a direct hit from a rifle round. It was a psychological comfort more than a physical shield, a heavy, sweaty burden that merely hinted at protection rather than truly providing it. Your helmet mount, too, offered a limited sense of security. While essential for communicating with your pilot and crew chief through the intercom, its primary function in terms of ballistic protection felt almost secondary. It was good for deflecting incidental bumps, for keeping the sun out of your eyes. But against a determined sniper, its efficacy was questionable at best. It was a necessity for clear communication, but not a true bastion against the chaos of combat. Then there were the chicken plates heavy, ceramic armor inserts designed to be placed in your flak jacket, offering a stronger defense against direct hits. In theory, they were a lifesaver. In reality, they were so incredibly heavy, so cumbersome in the already cramped and stifling confines of the Huey, that most gunners simply refused to wear them. The added weight restricted movement, exacerbated the heat, and made an already demanding job even more physically draining. The trade-off felt too great, the burden too significant for a protection that was still far from absolute. In a desperate, almost superstitious act, some men would tuck Bibles under their shirts, believing the sacred text offered a spiritual, if not physical, layer of defense. It was a poignant gesture, a silent plea for divine intervention, transforming the thin paper and leather into a cheap armor against the impossible odds. It spoke volumes about the psychological toll, the need to find comfort and protection wherever it could be imagined. The ultimate, brutal truth was that only luck, pure, unadulterated chance, truly stopped the bullets. No amount of flak jacket, no ceramic plate, no sacred text could guarantee safety. You were exposed, fundamentally vulnerable, and your survival often hinged on a fraction of an inch, a split second of timing, or the fickle hand of fate. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a constant vibration through the thin metal, seemed to mock the idea of true protection, a steady reminder of the constant dance with chance, the relentless gamble of your existence. From your open doorway, as the Huey performed its intricate aerial dance, you were more than just a gunner. You were the crew's radar, their organic sensor, the eyes that ceaselessly scanned the verdant expanse below. Your gaze, honed by countless hours of vigilance, was a vital component of the aircraft's survival. The jungle, a living, breathing entity, was also a master of concealment, and your task was to peel back its deceptive layers, to spot the subtle anomaly, the telltale sign that hinted at danger. The Viet Cong, masters of guerrilla warfare, were almost impossibly camouflaged. They blended seamlessly into the dense foliage, becoming one with the shadows and textures of the landscape. They weren't just hidden, they were often disguised, adopting the innocent appearance of civilians working in rice paddies or tending to their simple villages. You learned to look for patterns that were subtly wrong, a flicker of movement that seemed unnatural, a glint of metal that shouldn't be there. Every shadow became a potential hiding place, every cluster of trees a possible ambush point. This was a war fought with raw eyeballs, without the aid of modern technological marvels. There was no night vision, no thermal imaging that could pierce the darkness and reveal the heat signatures of hidden enemies. There were no drones, no unmanned aerial vehicles sending back detailed reconnaissance. It was simply you, your sharpened senses, and the vast, unforgiving jungle. Every decision, every instinctual sweep of your M60 had to be made in mere seconds, often based on a gut feeling, a fleeting glimpse that your mind processed with astonishing speed. The pressure was immense, the consequences of a wrong judgment potentially catastrophic. This constant vigilance, this need for split-second decisions, often came with a heavy, unspoken burden, the tragic reality of civilian casualties. In the blur of a rapidly developing firefight, distinguishing friend from foe, farmer from fighter, became an agonizing dilemma. The lines blurred, the images fused, and sometimes, inevitably, innocent lives were caught in the crossfire. These moments, these devastating errors, haunted many a gunner for life, casting long, dark shadows long after the sound of the rotors faded. There was a dark, cynical joke that circulated among the crews, a coping mechanism for the impossible choices they faced. Banana tree moves, Ilse, Charlie, shoot first, apologize later. It was a grim simplification, a way to articulate the brutal calculus of survival in a confusing, morally ambiguous environment. While never truly meant as an instruction, it reflected the sheer difficulty, the crushing weight of having to make life or death decisions in an instant, with imperfect information, where hesitation could mean your own demise. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades becomes a soothing mantra, a constant sound that accompanies the relentless, searching gaze, a backdrop to the quiet, terrifying hunt. Among the many terrifying scenarios you faced, perhaps none stirred a deeper sense of dread and focused adrenaline than landing in a hot LZ. An LZ, or landing zone, was a designated area for inserting or extracting troops. A hot LZ meant one thing: the enemy was waiting, watching, prepared to unleash a torrent of fire the moment your skids touched down. It was akin to driving a bus, a slow, lumbering target, straight into a pre-planned ambush, knowing full well the trap was sprung. As the pilot initiated the descent, the air would thicken with an almost palpable tension. Your senses would sharpen, every fiber of your being screaming with heightened awareness. You'd lean out, your M60 already spitting fire, spraying non-stop into the tree line, into the suspected enemy positions. Your job, in those agonizing seconds, was to lay down such a volume of suppressive fire that it would offer a fleeting, fragile shield for the troops, for the young men who were about to leap from the relative safety of the helicopter into the very heart of the inferno below. You watched them go, their faces grim and determined, a knot forming in your gut as they vanished into the chaotic scene, praying your bullets kept them safe. In these moments, as the Huey settled and the ground troops disembarked, you, the door gunner, became a prime target. The open door, the silhouette against the sky, made you an easy mark for snipers who patiently waited for the perfect shot. And then there were the RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, a chillingly effective weapon that could tear through the helicopter's thin skin with catastrophic force. Every second on the ground felt like an eternity, an agonizing stretch of vulnerability where the world seemed to hold its breath. Even as the last soldier leaped out, or the wounded were dragged aboard, the ordeal was far from over. The Huey, often riddled with bullet holes, its metal groaning under the strain, still had to lift off, to climb out of the kill zone, banking and swaying as it defied the enemy's desperate attempts to bring it down. You could hear the muffled thwack of rounds hitting the fuselage, feel the subtle shudder of impact, knowing that each one was a potential catastrophe. The adrenaline coursed through your veins, a bitter taste in your mouth, until the helicopter gained altitude and the immediate danger began to recede, leaving behind a lingering tremor in your hands. The sheer vulnerability of the Huey in these situations spawned another piece of grim, dark humor. Hueys were often nicknamed flying beer cans. The image of a flimsy aluminum can, easily punctured and crushed, perfectly captured the fragile reality of your aerial fortress. Survivors, those who had endured multiple trips into these death traps, often spoke with a weary, knowing certainty. After a few hot LZs, you've got a passport to hell. It wasn't a wish for damnation, but a recognition of the profound psychological toll. The way these experiences branded your soul with the indelible mark of absolute terror and survival. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the rotor blades, which had been a frantic drumbeat of dread during the descent, gradually mellows into a soothing, almost hypnotic rhythm as you climb to safety, carrying the echoes of the chaos away into the open sky. Beyond the roar of gunfire and the terror of incoming rounds, there was another, more subtle layer of chaos within the Huey, the relentless, often painful deluge of spent brass casings. As your M60 spat fire, the empty bullet shells, hot and gleaming, would eject from the weapon in a continuous stream. For first-timers, the sheer volume was astonishing. You would find yourself, after a particularly intense firefight, standing knee-deep in a shimmering carpet of spent brass, the metallic residue crunching under your boots. It was a bizarre, almost surreal landscape within the confines of the cabin. A golden, metallic river flowing around your feet. These casings, ejected at blistering temperatures, would bounce and roll across the vibrating floor like 1,000 fiery coins. They found their way into every crevice, every corner, and often, inevitably, onto your skin. The contact was a sharp, stinging burn, a sudden jolt of pain that made you wince. Even amidst the larger dangers, you'd feel them dropping onto your forearms, down the back of your neck, even into the folds of your uniform. Each hot touch a miniature torment. It was a constant, irritating companion to the cacophony of battle. The gunners, with their ever-present gallows humor, would sometimes joke about slipping on golden floors. The imagery was stark and vivid, a battlefield covered not in blood, but in the gleaming, lethal byproduct of your own weapon, transforming the dirty, utilitarian floor of the Huey into a deceptive, dangerous surface. The accumulation of brass could indeed make the footing treacherous, adding another, albeit minor, hazard to your already precarious position. Even the pilots, insulated somewhat from the direct spray of brass, sometimes voiced their complaints. The rolling casings had a mischievous way of finding their way into the cockpit, bouncing off critical controls, or even becoming lodged in mechanisms. It was a distraction, an annoyance, a small but persistent disruption in the tightly controlled environment of the front cabin. The air within the Huey, already thick with the smell of gunpowder and aviation fuel, would grow hotter, transforming the entire cabin into a furnace of sound, fire, and rapidly ejecting metal. It was an environment of sensory overload, a crucible of steel and lead. And, of course, there was another grim piece of dark humor, a final, cynical punchline to the ordeal of the brass. If brass didn't kill you, Charlie might. It was a wry acknowledgement that even the detritus of your own defense could be a minor threat, a way of underscoring the omnipresent danger from every direction. The constant, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a steady beat beneath the clatter and burn of the brass, became a strange kind of lullaby, accompanying the chaotic symphony of hot metal and searing skin. A gentle reminder that even the smallest details of this war held their own unique torments. The war, from your perch in the Huey, was not merely a series of explosions and gunfire. It was a symphony, a cacophony of sounds, smells, and sights that imprinted themselves deeply into your memory, never to be truly forgotten. The overriding sound, the very heartbeat of your existence, was the thunderous roar of the rotor blades. It was a relentless, pulsating beat. vibrating through the air, through the metal of the helicopter, and deep into your bones. This was the omnipresent baseline, the foundation upon which all other sounds of chaos were built. Beneath that thunder, or sometimes piercing through it, was the staccato rhythm of your M60. Rat-a-tat-tat. It would declare a rapid-fire assertion of your presence, a metallic voice that spoke of destruction and defense. This was often joined by the distant, sharper crack of enemy AK-47s, the heavier thump of a mortar round, the high-pitched whine of incoming rockets. It was a terrifying, mesmerizing composition of violence, a relentless soundtrack that defined every moment in the sky. And sometimes, cutting through all of it, a sound that chilled you to the core, human screams, thin and desperate, lost amidst the mechanical fury. The smells were equally vivid, equally insistent. The acrid tang of gunpowder, sharp and metallic, permeated everything. It mixed with the slightly sweet, industrial scent of aviation fuel, an intoxicating cocktail that filled your nostrils. Beneath these, the ever-present smell of your own sweat, a pungent, earthy aroma that spoke of fear, exertion, and the relentless tropical heat. And sometimes, terrifyingly, a new, sickening scent would emerge, carried on the wind, the faint, cloying smell of burning flesh, a stark and horrific reminder of the war's ultimate cost, a scent that clung to your memory long after the mission ended. Veterans, those who had endured countless flights, spoke of the rotor beat staying in their heads forever, even in the quietest moments back at base, in the unsettling silence of night. The ghost of that rhythmic thrum would persist, a phantom vibration in their minds, a constant echo of the experiences endured. It became an indelible part of their being, a permanent souvenir of their time in the open doorway. As the Huey hovered or swept low, the powerful rotor wash, the invisible force churned by the spinning blades, would blast downwards, a miniature storm unleashed upon the jungle. You'd watch, with a detached fascination, as villagers' hats were torn from their heads, their laundry hung out to dry, sent swirling wildly into the air, a momentary, almost comical disruption in their daily lives. It was a fleeting interaction, a sudden, powerful reminder of your presence, an airborne disturbance in a quiet, grounded existence. When night fell, the chaos took on a new, mesmerizing beauty. The tracers from your weapon, and those from the enemy, painted the inky blackness with vibrant streaks of light. Red, orange, green, they arced across the sky like deadly fireworks, a psychedelic light show of destruction. Each glowing line was a visible trajectory of death, a terrifying yet hypnotic display against the backdrop of distant stars. It was beautiful and horrific, a macabre ballet of light and shadow. The entire experience, with its overwhelming sensory input, earned its own nickname among the troops, Vietnam's live rock concert. It was a fitting, if darkly humorous, description for the relentless, deafening, and ultimately unforgettable performance that played out in the skies above the jungle. The slow, persistent thrum of the rotor blades, ever present, acts as the conductor of this intense symphony, a steady, hypnotic pulse beneath the chaos and beauty. In the cramped, vibrating confines of the Huey, amidst the deafening roar and the constant threat of death, an extraordinary bond was forged, a brotherhood tighter than any family you had ever known. You were crammed together, often shoulder to shoulder, living and fighting in a space that barely tolerated your presence. The shared danger, the relentless proximity, and the absolute reliance on one another for survival created an unbreakable connection. Every laugh, every shared meal, every quiet moment of fear or despair within that metal shell cemented a bond that transcended the normal definitions of friendship. Nicknames, a common currency in military life, took on a deeper significance here. They were not just identifiers, but badges of shared experience, intimate tokens of recognition. Helmets and guns, the tools of your trade, became canvases for crude art, for personal graffiti, small defiant statements against the anonymity of war, a faded drawing of a pin-up girl, a scrawled motto, a unit insignia, each one a small assertion of individuality, a tiny piece of home carried into the sky. These small acts of personalization were vital, a way to reclaim a piece of humanity in a dehumanizing environment. The loss of one of your crew, a buddy who had flown countless missions by your side, felt like losing a limb. It wasn't just a casualty report. It was a gaping wound in the very fabric of your shared existence. The silence they left behind was deafening. The empty space a stark, painful reminder of their absence. You mourned not just a comrade, but a confidant, a partner in the dance of death, someone who understood, without a single word, the terrifying reality you faced every day. Sometimes. The grim task of returning a body to base was even more heartbreaking. You would witness the transfer of what remained, perhaps just a helmet, a mangled piece of gear, and a body bag that seemed impossibly small. A stark testament to the brutality of what had occurred. These moments were etched into your memory, a silent, poignant sorrow that settled heavily in your chest. Yet, amidst the horror, there were moments of profound human connection. You shared laughs, sudden bursts of inappropriate humor born of tension. You ate meals together, often cold and unappetizing, but transformed into feasts by the shared company. And sometimes, in the quiet lulls between missions, you shared tears, not of weakness, but of exhaustion, of grief, of the sheer emotional weight of it all. These were the raw, unfiltered moments that forged an enduring camaraderie, a silent pact to face the impossible together. And, of course, the dark humor persisted. A vital coping mechanism. There was the ever-present joke about snorers. Snorers get tied outside the door for fresh air. It was a light-hearted jab, a way to release tension, to find a moment of levity in an otherwise grim reality. But it also subtly acknowledged the incredible closeness, the forced intimacy of your shared existence in the sky. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the rotor blades, a constant, soothing drone, becomes the silent witness to this profound brotherhood, a gentle echo of the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of air and fire. The ingenuity born of necessity in the field was a constant marvel, transforming the standard Huey into a bespoke, often haphazard, machine of survival. Faced with unrelenting threats and often lacking formal solutions, the crews became master improvisers, turning ordinary objects into instruments of defense. You saw it everywhere, this relentless creativity, this drive to adapt and overcome. Protection, or the severe lack thereof, was a primary concern. Standard armor was insufficient, often non-existent where it was needed most. So, sandbags, heavy and unwieldy, were piled high on the floor, offering a crude but effective barrier against incoming rounds. Jeep seats, salvaged from wrecked vehicles, were sometimes bolted to the cabin floor, providing a slightly more comfortable and marginally more protected place for troops or even a makeshift gunner's perch. You even heard tales of tank scraps, heavy pieces of salvaged armor plate being welded onto Hueys, turning the sleek aircraft into Frankenstein machines. Each modification a desperate prayer for survival. The M60, a powerful weapon, sometimes felt sluggish, too slow to swing through its arc to engage a rapidly appearing target. So, bungee cords, those simple elastic ropes, were strapped to the machine guns. These cords provided a spring-like tension, assisting the gunner in pulling the heavy weapon quickly from one side to the other, making for faster swing arcs and quicker target acquisition. It was a small but vital modification, giving you precious milliseconds in a fight where every second counted. When the guns jammed, as they inevitably did in the dust and grime of combat, there was no time for delicate repairs. If your weapon sputtered to a halt in the middle of a hot landing zone, your training might suggest a complex clearing procedure, but necessity dictated raw improvisation. You learned to toss grenades by hand, lobbing them out of the open door, hoping the explosion would deter the enemy long enough for your gun to be brought back online. It was a desperate measure, a gamble, but sometimes it was all you had. And when you ran completely out of ammunition, a terrifying prospect in the middle of a firefight, even more outlandish tactics emerged. You heard tales, often recounted with a grim chuckle, of crews tossing empty Coke bottles out of the Huey, hoping the sudden clatter and flash would create enough confusion, enough of a momentary distraction, to buy time for an escape or for ground support to arrive. These were not tactics taught in any manual. They were born in the crucible of direct, terrifying experience. The Hueys themselves, through these ceaseless modifications, became living testaments to improvisation. Each aircraft a unique collection of battlefield solutions, a patchwork of ingenuity. Maintenance trickery was also common. If your M60 jammed mid-fight, the official procedure was slow. The practical, field-expedient solution, passed down from veteran to rookie, was to slam the M60 with a hammer, a violent, desperate attempt to shock the mechanism back into functioning. It was brutal, often effective, and perfectly emblematic of the raw, desperate spirit of innovation that permeated every aspect of your life in the air. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a constant, steady beat, now seems to hum with the collective spirit of human ingenuity, a gentle underscore to the endless adaptations of survival. Among the spectrum of your duties, the medevac missions, the flights to retrieve the wounded, stood apart. They were, without hyperbole, suicide missions, direct plunges into red zones, areas of intense, unrelenting enemy fire. The purpose was singular, clear, and universally respected to save lives, no matter the cost. You flew into places where no one else dared to linger, where the very air seemed to crackle with lead, because there were men bleeding on the ground, calling for you. As the Huey descended, an angelic beast swooping into hell, your M60 would begin its furious song, spraying a continuous curtain of fire into the surrounding tree lines. This was not a moment for precision. It was a moment for volume, for overwhelming suppression. You fired relentlessly, a human shield of lead, while below, frantic medics and brave ground troops dragged bloodied men aboard, the sight of their faces contorted in pain. their uniforms soaked in crimson, was a searing image that would haunt your dreams. Each body pulled aboard was a victory, but also a stark, visceral reminder of the brutality unfolding beneath you. By the mission's end, the helicopter's floor was often soaked in blood, a macabre painting of heroism and suffering. The metallic scent of it would mingle with the gunpowder and fuel, creating an unforgettable, sickening aroma that clung to the air, to your uniform, to your very being. It was a physical manifestation of the toll, a silent testament to the lives teetering on the brink. Sometimes, in a horrifying twist of fate, as you sprayed your defensive fire, you would realize, with a cold, sickening jolt, that you were covering your own best friend down below. The face, perhaps partially obscured by dirt and sweat, would suddenly become devastatingly familiar. In that instant, the abstract became profoundly personal, transforming your duty into a desperate, frantic fight for the life of someone you loved. The M60 became not just a weapon, but a desperate, roaring prayer. The grim humor that permeated every aspect of this war found its way even into the darkest corners of medevac. Soldiers, with a weary, knowing smile, would often remark, "Our chopper looks more like a butcher shop." It was a blunt, shocking description, but it captured the raw, brutal reality of what these missions entailed. The image was disturbing, yet oddly accurate, a way to articulate the unspeakable. Despite the horror, the terror, the profound moral injury that sometimes accompanied these missions, they were also, paradoxically, the source of the most intense pride. There was an undeniable sense of purpose, a clear, unambiguous good in risking your life to save another. You might carry the nightmares, the trauma, the lingering scent of blood, but you also carried the profound satisfaction of having made a difference, of having been there, in the darkest hour, for those who needed you most. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, usually a symbol of impending danger, now becomes a gentle, almost reverent hum, a calming rhythm accompanying the profound acts of courage and compassion in the heart of chaos. Beyond the immediate, searing fear of bullets and explosions, another, more primal terror often gripped you, the chilling prospect of falling. You were always aware of it, the ever-present possibility of tumbling from the open doorway, of being snatched by the wind and cast into the unforgiving green abyss below. Your monkey strap, that thin leash cinched around your waist, was the only thing between you and that terrifying plunge, a constant, fragile tether to life. You could feel its subtle tension, its reassuring grip, and simultaneously, its terrifying inadequacy against the vastness of the sky. The Huey, for all its power and agility, was not a stable platform. During wild maneuvers, sharp turns, evasive banks designed to avoid incoming fire, you would be thrown around like a rag doll. The forces exerted on your body were immense, threatening to tear you from your precarious perch. In those heart-stopping moments, you felt like a dangling puppet, your body swinging wildly outside the aircraft, held only by that slender strap, the wind tearing at your clothes, the jungle rushing up to meet you in a terrifying blur. Each lurch, each unexpected dip, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through your system, a momentary gasp of terror. And sometimes, despite all precautions, despite all the training, men did fall. Some, incredibly, survived the plummet. their bodies crashing through the dense canopy, landing, miraculously, alive on the jungle floor. Their ordeal, however, was far from over. Disoriented, often injured, they would fight on, isolated and vulnerable, until rescue could arrive, battling not just the elements, but the ever-present enemy. You heard the incredible tales, the stories whispered in hushed tones of these almost mythical falls. One such legend involved a gunner who, after falling from his Huey, landed directly on 2 Viet Cong soldiers. In the immediate, disorienting chaos of impact, he managed to kill them both. Then, injured but alive, he established a defensive perimeter and waited for his pickup. It was a story of impossible odds, of sheer, desperate survival that seemed to defy belief. Yet it was recounted as fact, a testament to the extraordinary resilience born of unimaginable circumstances. The dark humor, as always, found a way to surface even around this profound fear. Survive a fall, get promoted for free, was a common, wry joke. It was a way to diffuse the terror, to acknowledge the absurdity of such an improbable survival, but also to tacitly admire the sheer grit required. Yet, beneath the jokes, the fear persisted. The fear of falling was often worse than the fear of bullets. Bullets were quick, impersonal, a sudden end. Falling was a slow, agonizing descent, a terrifying, drawn-out experience of helplessness, of watching the world rush up to meet you, a conscious plummet into the unknown. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a constant vibration that you could feel through your entire body, now seemed to beat with a deeper, more anxious resonance. A gentle reminder of the dizzying height and the ever-present danger of the skyfall. From your unique vantage point, sweeping above the landscape, you saw the war unfold not just between uniformed armies, but in the subtle, often heartbreaking, intersections with civilian life. The Viet Cong, masters of their terrain, melted into the populace with chilling effectiveness. They blended into villages, their fighters often indistinguishable from the farmers toiling in the fields, even from the innocent faces of children playing by their homes. This made your task not just dangerous, but morally fraught, blurring the lines of combat in ways that deeply unsettled you. Every split-second choice became an agonizing dilemma to shoot or to risk being shot. A seemingly innocent figure moving through the trees, a person working a rice paddy. Could they be an enemy combatant, or simply an ordinary civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? The hesitation, that crucial fraction of a second, could be fatal. You had to make instantaneous judgments, often with incomplete information, knowing that a mistake could have horrific consequences. The lines were further blurred by the grim reality that children, sometimes no older than 12 or 13, were also drawn into the conflict. You heard the stories, and occasionally witnessed the terrifying truth of kids hurling grenades at Hueys, their small arms surprisingly effective in the chaotic environment of a landing zone. It was a shattering realization, to see innocence twisted into an instrument of war, to know that even the most vulnerable could pose a deadly threat. This further complicated the already impossible choices, adding another layer of moral despair to your duty. These civilian casualties, the unintended victims of a brutal conflict, became lifelong scars for many gunners. The images, the faces, the silent questions of guilt and responsibility would replay in their minds long after the sounds of the war had faded. These were not just statistics. They were profoundly personal burdens, etching themselves onto the soul. The "you must not such commands relentless obsession with body count. The numerical tally of enemy killed further blurred the lines of morality. This metric, intended to measure success, often incentivized aggression and made distinguishing combatant from non-combatant even more difficult under pressure. It was a dehumanizing approach that ignored the complex human cost of the conflict. The pervasive dark humor, a constant companion in the absurdity of war, even touched upon this sensitive issue. Charlie disguised as Grandma, best camouflage ever, was a cynical joke, a way to highlight the arbitrary and often unreliable nature of the body count. It was a brutal simplification of a truly complex and tragic aspect of the war, a testament to the mental strain of living in a world where even the most benign appearance could conceal a deadly threat. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a constant, melancholic sound, becomes a gentle accompaniment to these difficult reflections, a quiet underscore to the profound moral complexities woven into the fabric of your experience. When the Huey finally landed, its engines sputtered into silence, and you stepped back onto solid ground. The war was far from over. It had simply shifted domains, migrating from the physical battlefield to the internal landscape of your mind. Back at base, in the unsettling quiet of the barracks, sleep often proved elusive. The silence, after hours of deafening noise, felt unnatural, a void that your brain eagerly filled with the echoes of the day's chaos. Your dreams, when they finally came, were not restful escapes, but relentless replays. They were filled with the ceaseless roar of the rotor noise, a phantom vibration in your ears. The tracers, those deadly fireworks, would arc across the dark canvas of your eyelids, painting vivid, terrifying patterns against the blackness. And the screams, human cries of pain and fear, would echo in your memory, piercing the fragile illusion of peace. It was a tormenting loop, an involuntary reliving of the day's horrors, denying you the solace of true rest. To escape this relentless onslaught, many turned to whatever relief they could find. Booze flowed freely, a desperate attempt to numb the senses, to quiet the screaming thoughts. Cigarettes, endless chains of them, offered a fleeting ritual, a moment of focused breath in the chaos. And for some, in the deepest throes of despair, even heroin became a means to an end, a desperate, dangerous path to knock out, to temporarily silence the torment that refused to abate. These were not choices made lightly, but desperate attempts to simply turn off the relentless replay button in their minds. You observed, with a grim understanding, how some would laugh manically while retelling the day's horrors. It wasn't genuine joy, but a defense mechanism, a dark, hysterical coping strategy. By transforming the unspeakable into a macabre joke, by forcing a laugh, they sought to regain a sliver of control, to distance themselves from the raw, visceral terror. It was a harrowing sight, witnessing the thin veneer of sanity stretch taut over a chasm of trauma. The phrase PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, was not yet widely understood, but its insidious effects were undeniably present. Veterans described their experience as 90% boredom in war, 10% terror replayed forever. This sentiment perfectly encapsulated the insidious nature of the trauma. The moments of intense fear, though brief, were etched into the mind with an indelible clarity, condemned to be relived over and over again, long after the physical danger had passed. It was a lifetime sentence, a relentless haunting. The war gave you a lifetime ticket to the memory roller coaster, a nickname that offered a chillingly accurate description of the internal turmoil. It was a ride you could never get off, a series of peaks and valleys, sudden drops and terrifying loops, all contained within the confines of your own mind. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a sound that once defined your waking life, now becomes a gentle, mournful echo in the silence of your sleepless nights. A constant, soothing, yet persistent reminder of the battles fought long ago. The strategic framework that governed the war, particularly from the perspective of U.S. command, often boiled down to a single, stark metric: the body count. There was an almost obsessive focus on the numbers of enemy killed, a relentless push for higher tallies, as if victory could be measured solely by this grim ledger. This pressure filtered down through the ranks, reaching even your exposed perch in the open doorway of the Huey. You, the door gunner, were tacitly, and sometimes explicitly, pushed to shoot more, to report higher kills, to contribute to the ever-increasing tally. This relentless demand for numbers created a profound moral conflict within many. You fired your weapon not out of personal hatred for the unseen enemy, but because it was your duty, because you were ordered to do so, because your life and the lives of those around you depended on it. Yet, the emphasis on body count often felt disconnected from the immediate, visceral reality of the battlefield. "I fired because of orders, not because of hate," was a sentiment often expressed, a quiet struggle to reconcile duty with the personal cost. In the aftermath of intense firefights, when adrenaline had begun to recede and the pressure for reports mounted, some admitted to inflating their numbers. A quick burst into a tree line, a fleeting glimpse of movement, could easily be converted into a confirmed kill on the tally sheet, a necessary embellishment to meet the expectations from above. It was a complex psychological landscape, where the pressure to perform, to demonstrate effectiveness, sometimes outweighed the strict adherence to verifiable truth. The numbers, in this sense, became less about accurate accounting and more about psychological warfare, both against the enemy and within your own command structure. The pervasive dark humor, a constant companion in the absurdity of war, even touched upon this sensitive issue. Every bamboo stalk with holes equals one confirmed kill was a cynical joke, a way to highlight the arbitrary and often unreliable nature of the body count. It underscored the difficulty of truly verifying kills from a fast-moving helicopter, where targets were often fleeting and obscured by dense foliage. Historically, this reliance on body counts became a significant point of contention, eventually serving as stark evidence of a flawed U.S. strategy. It created an environment where the perceived success of operations was measured by a gruesome tally, rather than by genuine strategic gains or the winning of hearts and minds. It fostered a mindset that overlooked the deeper complexities of the conflict, reducing human lives to mere statistics. The slow, rhythmic thrum of the rotor blades, a constant, almost hypnotic pulse, now seems to resonate with the quiet tension of this moral struggle, a gentle backdrop to the profound ethical questions that lingered long after the battles were fought. As the years turned into decades, and the war receded into the annals of history, the image of the door gunner emerged as one of its most potent and iconic symbols. You see it everywhere now in movies. The roar of the Huey's blades, a cinematic shorthand for Vietnam. In music, haunting melodies that speak of jungle heat and desperate flights, and in memoirs, the vivid, first-hand accounts that bring the terror and camaraderie to life. The door gunner, perched precariously, M60 blazing, became a powerful archetype, a visual representation of both the brutal efficiency and the raw vulnerability of the conflict. But the true legacy, the deeper, more profound impact, was not found in the silver screen or the pages of books. It was etched into the souls of the men who lived it. The unspoken, profound legacy was PTSD, a relentless trauma that continued to haunt them long after the last bullet was fired. It manifested as nightmares, as jumpiness, as an inability to reconnect with a world that could not possibly understand what they had endured. The scars were not always visible, but they were deeply felt. Wounds that never truly healed. A constant ache in the quiet corners of their lives. The door gunners became, in a sense, the living statues of the Vietnam War. Their quiet dignity, their haunted eyes, their stories shared in hushed tones, spoke volumes about the sacrifices made and the burdens carried. They bore witness to the war's rawest edges, embodying the paradox of extreme exposure and extreme firepower. They carried the weight of history on their shoulders, silent monuments to a conflict that redefined a generation. For many, the experience was so visceral, so deeply scarring, that they never set foot in a helicopter again. The very sight, the familiar thrum of the rotors, would trigger a cascade of memories, a resurgence of the terror they had fought so hard to suppress. The sky, once their domain, became a place of profound unease, a reminder of the hell they had escaped. Yet, in a testament to the enduring human spirit, some found a way to turn their trauma, their darkest memories, into a unique form of dark humor. It was a coping mechanism, a way to survive the relentless onslaught of memory, to find a sliver of lightness in the unbearable weight of their past. These jokes, grim and knowing, were often understood only by those who had shared the experience, a private language of survival. And so, as the memories drift, like smoke from an old campfire, you hear a final, poignant quote, a whisper carried on the wind. We held the sky, but the sky never held us. It speaks of the fleeting dominance, the momentary power, and the ultimate impermanence of their time aloft. They were masters of a fragile domain, yet the vast, indifferent sky offered no solace, no permanent embrace. It was merely a stage for their harrowing dance, a silent witness to their courage and their suffering. And as the story fades, like the distant sound of retreating rotors, the quiet hum of the air remains, a gentle, soothing presence, leaving you with a profound sense of the enduring spirit that carried these men through the unbearable, and a quiet reverence for the legacy they left behind.